everyone. Thank you for joining us for the future of competitive intelligence in an AI-enabled world. We're really thrilled to be offering you this topic, which I know is at the top of so many practitioners' minds. And I'm also particularly delighted to invite Dr. Fred Hoffman and Dr. Shelly Freyn to join us in presenting this. This is off of a paper they had written published last year. And so they'll be able to tell you more about that as well. And so I'm not going to go into much detail about who the council is because many of you already know who we are. But we are here in our educational mission to support the practice of CI. So we appreciate your joining us here. And I want to introduce to you, Dr. Fred Hoffman, who is chair and assistant professor in the Intelligence Studies program at Mercyhurst University. And Fred also has had a career, in the intelligence community, in national security, and so he brings terrific experience with that as well. And so so I'm really delighted that he's able to offer the depth of that insight along with CI practices, including his teaching. And then we'll also be speaking with Dr. Shelly Freyn, who's assistant professor of marketing at the College of Business at Alfred University. She's also a CI fellow, and so we're really delighted to have her and Dr. Hoffman share their works with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Freyn so that they can begin their talk without further ado. And then we will come back and take a look at some council programs. So to you, Shelly.
Great. Hi, all. Thanks so much for joining us. Fred is going to start first, and he will be discussing, as Cynthia mentioned, our paper. And then I will talk a little bit about preparing future CI analysts. It's kind of a unique presentation in that Fred has joined Mercyhurst, and he is now the director of the Business Competitive Intel program, and myself, co-creator and also director. So of course we have a vested interest in this. We're going to be doing a survey at the end, and we ask that if you could, we would love to hear your opinion on preparing future CI analysts. So I'll tell you a little more about that towards the end. For now, we're going to take it over to Fred.
Good afternoon, everybody. So before we start talking about artificial intelligence and its impact on competitive intelligence, let's do a very quick history lesson on CI, okay? Late 1980s, early 1990s, 5 things happened, right? Proliferation of computers, digitization of information, proliferation of internet access, proliferation of mobile telephony, and globalization. So those 5 things were a real shot in the arm to what we do for a living, because information was suddenly available from multiple sources. Voluminous, OSINT became a discipline in the intelligence community in 2006. So a lot of good things happened. Then about a decade and a half ago, AI came along, right? Artificial intelligence. Well, actually AI has been around a long time, but it really sort of came into its own about a decade and a half ago. So AI, artificial intelligence, and big data, which we'll talk about. But those 2 things, AI and big data, have impacted a number of industries. But what we're going to focus on here today is what the implications are for CI. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are these things. And you'll see there's a variety of topics we're going to really touch on. But I want to kick off with talking about bottom line up front, okay, bluff. So what are 4 things that we as CI practitioners can anticipate in this new environment? And then what are 6 things that we can do to adapt to that new environment that we find ourselves in? So to make those things more clear, we're going to touch on these other topics that you see here. And we're really going to look at what's known as commercial intelligence, right? The disciplines that comprise that. So knowledge management, business intelligence, and competitive intelligence. And what you're going to see is how AI impacts all 3 in different ways. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what you can expect in this new environment. And this year is based on my experience before I went into academia. I spent a little under 7 years as the research director for a CI company. And these are some of the things that I noticed, right? So first off is changing client expectations. Clients who are conditioned with their expectations about AI, whether or not those expectations are rooted in reality is a different topic, but they have different expectations when you walk in the door as a CI practitioner, because they've been sort of conditioned by what's going on in the AI world for business intelligence, big data, analytics, and other things. Another change is that the need to educate clients. So basically what you've got to do is you've got to school them. You've got to sit down with your customers or your clients and explain to them, okay, you know, here's what we do, and here's the value proposition for what we do, and here's how we do what we do, which is different from what they think AI can do for them. So there's an education component. Information requirements are going to be different. So one of the big things that we all know this intuitively and also from our experience, you've got to sit down with your client, and their understanding of what their task is to you may actually be different from what the task ends up being, because what you're going to say is, okay, I understand you want us to find out about A, B, C, and D, about this competitor firm, and then you do some negotiation and revise the tasking. One of the challenges that I've noticed is what's been referred to as the democratization of knowledge, right? If you give 1,000 monkeys 1,000 typewriters in 1,000 years, one of them may type Hamlet, right? Everybody who's got a computer has got the innate capability to do research. Not necessarily open source intelligence. They may not know the tradecraft, they may not know the methodology, the techniques, what sources they exploit, but there's more of a tendency for companies to do things in-house. And then finally, the need for a niche, right? You want to basically you want to be your value proposition. You want to have your clients and your customers think of you, hey, we had this company that came in and did X for us on this one issue. Let's bring them back in again. So you want to develop that sort of go-to mentality in your client. So 6 ways that we can adapt. All right. So we talked about for adjustments. Now here's 6 ways we can adapt to this new environment. First of all, leverage technology, and as we're going to see in this presentation today, the technology available to enhance competitive intelligence is different than for PI. And we're going to go into some level of detail about that. But there is technology that's out there. The company I used to work for, we had our own competitive intelligence product that was developed by competitive intelligence practitioners and pushed out to very satisfied customers who made good use of it. But bottom line is you want to enhance your existing capabilities and develop new skills doing your traditional competitive intelligence activities using technology. Second, become a master presenter, become a storyteller. That's really what we're good at. We're good storytellers, okay? Because there's the what, where you come in and you throw up your slides, you do your visualization, and then you tell, explain what the person is looking at, but then you say the why, right? What are the implications? What does this mean? Okay, looking down the road into the future, what does it really translate to? So you want to be a good storyteller, you want to be a visualizer. And then third, you want to adapt and adjust to the new information. So what happens is on a lot of these CI projects, in fact, I can't think of any where this wasn't the case, you start off with initial requirements, you go out, you do some collection, you come back along the way, and you have your checkpoints with the client. The client says, this is great, A, B, and C are great, D, E, and F, not so much, and then you sort of shift gears. So you want to become adaptable, okay, if you aren't already. Okay, acquiring skills and modifying workflows. This kind of ties in with the software and the technology point that I made. Because what you want to do is you want to selectively go out and pull in technology that's going to benefit you, that's going to give you an enhanced capability or a new capability that you didn't have before. But a real foot stomper here, folks, is you don't want to let the technology drive how you do your business. You want to look at the technology very critically and say, what can this do for me? What can I do differently? What can I do that I haven't been able to do before? What can I do better? Okay, so you want to adapt technology and bring that into your tool chest. Agile generalists. This is actually a huge point because one of the problems with the proliferation of information is you can't be the resident expert. I mean, I can recall, I'm old enough to remember working with colleagues in the IC where you had a guy or a woman you went to, and they were the resident expert on topic X. Nobody knew more than they did. You go to them, and they can give you a chapter and verse. The problem for us as CI professionals right now is that we can't base our value on that anymore, okay, as being subject matter experts. What we can do, however, is be experts in knowing where to go to obtain information. that is accessible, reliable, and provides insights to the customers. So that's kind of a shift there, cultural shift, becoming an agile generalist. And then finally, adopting a modular approach. And what I mean by this is you basically develop repeatable skill sets, because what this does is it familiarizes people with their expectations of what they're supposed to be doing, how they're going to do it, who's going to be doing it. And then that way, when you approach different problems, you plug and play. So if you've got 6 people on your team, you've got 1 or 2 that are experts in a certain data source exploitation. Maybe you've got a couple of human intelligence experts. Maybe you've got other experts with specific software or access to certain databases. So by becoming modular, you accelerate your workflow. You're able to do it more efficiently and more effectively. Okay, key point about this slide is intelligence is 2 things. It's both a process and it's also a product, right? But when we think about intelligence, we think about the intelligence cycle, all right? But we also talk about these 3 disciplines that I mentioned before, and AI affects each one of them differently, as we're going to see. So this graphic, the only thing this graphic is meant to do is to demonstrate to you AI in a nutshell, okay? This came out of a Forbes document, and basically it shows the amount of data, right, generated by a single engine on an airliner, okay? So 20 terabytes of data every hour per engine, right? So you multiply that by 2. Now, if it's doing a cross-country flight, by 6 hours it's in the air, okay? So you do the math here, and what you see very quickly is you've got a voluminous amount of data, a lot of data. And in order to extrapolate insight and meaningful insight from that data, you've got to apply artificial intelligence, which means looking at repeatable tasks and voluminous amounts of information and extracting data that would insights rather that would otherwise not be available to you. So AI has had some real achievements. Okay, it's had some noteworthy, newsworthy, globally newsworthy achievements in recent years. Okay, 1997, IBM's Deepwater Blue, the predecessor to its current Watson, beat Garry Kasparov in chess. That's a pretty cool achievement. The Roomba vacuum. I don't know how many of you have one. I have one at home somewhere, gathering dust. Not in the way it was intended to, but it's gathering dust. Then you've got IBM Watson won on Jeopardy. That was a big deal, okay? So here's what happened. IBM went out and bought 3 companies because IBM was determined to move into the healthcare space. Their thinking was, we're gonna take this AI system where we can put voluminous amounts of medical information, diagnostic stuff, journal information, and make it easier for oncologists to extract information, wisdom from that and make better cancer predictions, right? Diagnoses. So they partnered with the Anderson Research Center, right? I believe it's in Houston, Texas. Anderson dropped $60 million on the IBM effort. The problem was the effort fell on its face because of reasons that we're going to talk about. An AI system is not at the point where it can match human cognition. So the bottom line here is AI has got a lot of hype. It's got a lot of focused utility. So when you get in the car and you use Waze or Skype, not Skype, other navigational systems, okay, you're using AI, right? But it's focused. It's very narrowly defined AI. So the AI system that beat Garry Kasparov in chess is not going to be able to vacuum your house. Okay, very different focus areas. So flavors of AI, and this is what I was just talking about. There's 2 flavors really. There's narrowly focused AI, okay, search engines, that's an example. Voice recognition, all right, Alexa, also AI. Satellite navigation. So we use some of these already, but they're very focused. You can't pick one up and apply it to another because that would require having what's known as artificial general intelligence, AGI AI, and we are not there yet. But artificial intelligence, AGI, the problem with a lot of the hype is that when you go in to talk to your clients, they're thinking, many of them, in this way, especially if they're not necessarily technically oriented, okay? So part of your job as CI professionals is to kind of reel them in from these unreasonable expectations about what they can get from us in CI and understand the limitations of artificial intelligence. So some of the limitations specifically, okay, AI, again, narrowly focused. It doesn't replicate human cognition. It doesn't do human intelligence. A famous quote about how an AI system will calculate to the nth degree, when a house will burn down, but it won't tell you to get out of the house that is burning down. And the bottom line with all the hype is the hype's created a lot of high expectations, but as we saw in the IBM case, and that's a representative example, by the way, it's not the only example, but people have gone in buying into the hype and having unrealistic expectations only to be disappointed. And trust me on this, I'm not in any way a Luddite or opposed to AI or opposed to technology. What I'm saying, though, is that we in the competitive intelligence space have a need and a responsibility to educate our clients as to what those limitations are and what the implications are. So big data, a lot of data. Okay, so we looked at those aircraft engines. The problem is data is mute and meaningless unless you apply some technology and some smarts and say, okay, I'm looking at this data and this is what the data means, okay? So you've got to have analysis, right? So the analysis component is also a major aspect of artificial intelligence. And analysis, by the way, is what we're very good at in competitive intelligence, okay? Causation versus correlation. I'll throw up a slide momentarily. You'll see the difference between the two, okay? Causation and correlation are different, okay? And just because something correlates doesn't mean one caused the other. And then finally, big judgment, okay? What we really do well in competitive intelligence is tell you the so what. Storytellers, right? We come in and say, here's the information, and based on this information, A, B, C, and D is what we think is going to happen. So cheese consumption compared to a number of people have died becoming tangled in their bed sheets. So the point of this is don't eat a lot of cheese because you might get tangled up in your bed sheets and die. Well, that's not what it means. But the thing is, the point here is visualization is powerful, it's helpful, it's useful, but you've got to also bear in mind what it is you're visualizing and have the analysis, right? Not just the data, but also the analysis. And that's what we're very good at in competitive intelligence. So in the public space, all right, you've got in the intelligence community, all right, a number of entities, all right, DIA in 2017, and I know this number's gone up considerably, but in terms of open source information, they had 137 AI-related pilot projects. And this cracks me up because it's like, if you're a parent, if you've got a horse or a boat, if you put the word marine or equine in front of any noun, it costs you twice as much to fix it, right? Because everybody's like, ooh, equine must be special. And that's what's happened with AI. AI is a big growth industry. The problem is, again, the height versus the capability. AI is really good for large volumes of information and repeatable tasks. But what it doesn't give you is the general, the AGI that we talked about earlier. So Los Angeles Police Department, quick war story. Okay, that had something called predictive policing, PredPol. Very, very voluminous amount of information that they put in, funding they put into it. Again, it was like the IBM story all over again, but different outcomes for different reasons. So what they were trying to do is let's look at the track record. Well, we have all this data on criminal activity that's happened in the past, but there's an ethical component, right? People lost their minds and said, wait a minute, what are we doing? We can't do this. So my point here is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Second of all, just because you can do something doesn't mean it's going to be accepted. Okay, and then third of all, just because you have the technology to do something doesn't mean it's going to give you what you think it's going to give you. So these are three shortcomings associated with AI in the public sector. Now in the commercial space, again, commercial triangle, business intelligence, competitive intelligence, knowledge management. BI has been the big benefactor of AI for reasons that we're going to see momentarily, all right? And what's developed from that is a subset of BI, which is now known as big data analytics, okay? So if you're a data scientist, you're gonna make a lot of money. A lot of companies want data scientists right now because a lot of companies have systems that, guess what? They generate massive amounts of information, okay? So they wanna take that information, put it into subset databases and be able to derive wisdom from it. And for that, you need a data scientist. So that drew directly from BI, and we'll talk about BI momentarily. But first, we'll talk about knowledge management. So knowledge management is basically a company or an organization is going to create knowledge. It's going to store knowledge. It's going to analyze knowledge. It's going to disseminate knowledge. That person who gets their gold watch and their retirement and walks out the door after 50 years, they've got tacit knowledge that they've acquired over those 50 years that's irreplaceable, right? How do you capture that? How do you capture it? How do you make it available? Well, AI has been a beneficiary. Knowledge management has been a beneficiary of AI, because knowledge management takes large amounts of information from different places and does all those things to make it accessible to folks. Quick example, Internet of Things, right? If you're able to pick up your cell phone and change your temperature on your thermostat in your house from 3 states away, guess what? You've now used Internet of Things. There's a corollary to that, the industrial Internet of Things. And the industrial Internet of Things is basically taking AI technology and applying it to the Internet of Things. So if you have an industrial control system monitoring a petroleum facility, you can add web-enabled devices to better monitor and control all your different systems. So knowledge management is one area that has been a big beneficiary of AI. Next slide. All right, BI versus CI. There's 5 really, really important differences, and really, this is the crux of what I'm talking about here today. And this is part of the reason why you've got to educate clients, and part of the reason why the hype is such a big concern. So for BI, here's what you've got. Focus is internal. BI is the information generated by your company or by your organization. It's reliable, it's voluminous, it's accessible, right? And what you're doing is you're taking folks that have computer skills and statistics backgrounds and data warehousing, and they're monitoring what's going on, and they're coming into the CEO and they're visualizing, right, which we also do, but they're visualizing what these things mean, right? But the core function of IT for them is the bread and butter of what they do. Now look at what competitive intelligence does and how we're different. Our focus is external, right? So their business intelligence is looking internally at the company. We're looking externally. What are our peer competitors doing? What's going on in the world? How does COVID impact what our competitors are doing and where they're getting the supplies and how we operate, right? External. Second, data sources. Every CI product, the data sources are going to be different. Not only are they going to be different, but they're going to be outside the company for the most part, and they're going to be of, some will be high reliability and some will be questionable reliability. So that's going to be an area of difference. Library science and human intelligence. These have been traditionally 2 feeders for folks going into the competitive intelligence world. Why? Because you got to know where to find information, because every project is going to be pretty much different. And then you have to have the ability to go out and acquire it, either from human sources or through open source collection. And finally, IT has been more of a supporting function for us, right? We selectively apply it to the things where it'll benefit us. So again, CI, it's a product and it's a process, right? It's a car wax, right? And it's also a sandwich snack, right? So, it's 2 things. So when we're talking to clients, it's important that they understand that they're going to get a product, right? They're going to get a CI product, which, oh, by the way, some of the confusion in the literary world, right? In the literature on CI and BI, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there among folks who should know better. So if people are writing about business intelligence, competitive intelligence, and making this mistake, your clients may as well. So you've got to come in and say, here's the product you're going to get, but equally important, here's the process that you're going to use to get that product, right? These are the things that are not surprising to any of you here in terms of how we operate, but it's both of those 2 things, and this is critically important for us to convey. So CI project characteristics, and it's important to negotiate this with the client. Make sure that if they don't already understand it, that when you sit down to talk to them about what their issue is, that they understand this as well. So, as I mentioned before, every CI project is basically going to have unique requirements, unique sources of data, different ways of acquiring that data. Okay, it may be qualitative, it may be quantitative. There may be human sources, which really you don't do in BI, at least not in a systematic way, right? So the bottom line is, and this is really the foot stomp or the presentation, right? So AI is less helpful to CI than it is to BI, because we're using different types of information. Not all of it is readily accessible to us. And not all of it is of equal validity, okay? There's what we bring to the table is a heavy amount of business acumen and knowledgeability and the ability to know where to get information. And oh, by the way, we don't just talk about things that have happened and are happening. We talk about things that will happen. And that's really part of our value proposition. So in an AI world, what we bring to the table are things that AI cannot currently do and is not likely to do in the near future. Okay, you can't take your navigation device and vacuum your room, right? You can't take a narrowly defined AI system and replace human cognition. And similarly for CI, right? What we bring is emotional intelligence, we bring judgment, we bring experience, we bring knowledge, and we bring the so what that we apply to the what. We collect the data, which is the what, and then we relate the so what. So there are specific advantages to what we bring to the table, and those are the things that we need to convey as part of our value proposition to our clients. So again, AI systems very quickly go through voluminous amounts of information and gain insights, okay? But what it can't do is address intent. It cannot address intent. It can give you an indication, but an indication is not the same as definitively saying, you know, Pakistan is going to cross the Indian border tomorrow at 9 a.m., right? Very different. AI is unbiased, right? Because basically you're pulling the data, and if you're pulling from internal sources, it's voluminous and reliable, so it's not biased. But what do CI practitioners do? We separate the wheat from the chaff to gain insight, okay? Because we know where to get the information to answer the questions that we've negotiated with the client. We know how to interpret that information and to make analytical assessments and help them gain insight as to what to do or not do. We can address motive and intent. Motive and intent is in the future, okay? We can talk about the why, right? So these are things that we bring to the table and that we're practitioners of, that unfortunately AI will help us in certain ways, but it cannot replace the things that I just talked about. So just as a recap, you know, we covered a lot of things here today very quickly. We go into a lot more detail and sourcing material in our article on all these things. But the bottom line is AI is of value to us in specific applied ways. It'll help us to do things, certain things better that we are currently doing. It'll give us capabilities to do things we haven't done in the past, but it doesn't benefit in the same way or to the same extent that it benefits knowledge management and business intelligence.
So we're going to hand the baton over. Thank you, Fred. So we've talked about, or Fred has just filled you in on current CI analysts. We both, as I mentioned earlier, have a vested interest in how do we prepare future CI analysts. So I'm going to just hit a couple high points and recall we do have a survey at the end. So Fred talked about 6 ways practitioners can adapt. I'm going to just hit some of the key trends here, and then we're going to apply a little bit of gap analysis. So key points that practitioners adapting, of course, knowing the technology, knowing how to visualize. There's going to be new information, of course, and new tools and software. This is basically, as you can see, a trend in technology, knowing the data and how to use it. Not necessarily programming it, but knowing how to take it and tell the stories. This ties closely to a study that a couple grad students and I did a few years ago, where we looked at business analytics, which is of course another whole field, but there is a true synergy with CI. Taking 3 top job search engines, we looked at business analytics and we looked at the skill sets, and we found, as you can see, it's very multidisciplinary. There is the intelligence needs, the business needs, and the computer science needs. What really stood out for us is, of course, there's some hardcore skills of knowing, as Fred talked about, you know, some of the BI skills in business analytics, but there was also some softer skills like management skills, risk management, project management, communication skills. These all tie well with CI. So if we quickly apply it over to Mercyhurst's intelligence degree, we'll do a little mini case study here. It is multidisciplinary in itself. There is the theories and methods that are used specifically for the discipline. So for our business competitive intel, it's business, it's good old Michael Porter and many other STEEP, SWOT, all those good methodologies. As Fred had talked about, you also have to have basically earning a degree in library of science, how to use those open sources. And then communication is very key. But as I just mentioned, let's do a little gap analysis here. What we need, and it's not just Mercyhurst, but I think in preparing for CI analysts, there is definitely a need for some of the tools that are used in analytics and understanding collection of information and technology. So this ties back, I feel like I'm going to beat the dead horse here, but this ties back to how analytics and data really, as we mentioned before, marries with CI. When I teach financial ratio analysis and I'm showing them spreadsheets and income statements, etc., that's really interesting. Yes, that is the what, but that's all it says. And that's basically like AI, Internet of Things. It is the what. But why is this occurring? So analysts, as you know, have to have a lot of different skill sets. And I feel that we definitely have to maybe incorporate some of the analytics skill sets. So the key steps in preparing for that future CI analyst, research shows, of course, that we got to have those foundations, the theories, the methodologies of business, some basic knowledge of the tools and software. If they love it, they can go deeper, and AI and how to use it. Not necessarily how to do deep programming like a data scientist or a true business intelligence analyst, but basically what does it all mean, how to use it. And then good old-fashioned critical thinking, which Fred just talked about, what AI can't do, and communication skills. I always have presented especially the BCI program and CI analysts as kind of the liaison between executives and those data scientists. How do we collect this data? How do we analyze it? And then how do we communicate it? And of course, that's an amazing skill set to have. So we've talked a lot about good old AI, preparing an analyst, but I want to talk about very quickly, who are our future analysts? What do they look like? So our recent high school graduate, think about our recent high school graduate. Usually everybody's doom and gloom about, oh, our future generations. But I'm going to argue these are going to be some pretty good analysts because they've had to adapt to lots of changes in the environment. First off, they're born after 9/11. There were school shootings every year that they went to school, except this year because schools were closed. And they graduated with a pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and all the protests at the end of their high school career. That sounds pretty doom and gloom, but I'm going to tell you a very quick story. So a little local town where I grew up was doing a graduation ceremony. And I want you to think about it as a CI analyst. So the task is to graduate. But instead of a traditional pomp and circumstance, they're going to do a parade. So a different approach. They could ride in any kind of vehicle, whatever they wanted to use. They could wear whatever garb, within reason. But their task was to graduate. So in this small little town, you had fancy cars and people dressed up with the signs, of the senior. It is a small rural town. You had graduates driving tractors. There were military vehicles coming down the parade. There was semi-beds with picnic tables and students graduating and waving. This is a little shout out to my nephew. This was my nephew. He decided he was wearing the full out garb, but he's going down with a Harley Davidson. So why do I bring this up? Because I see these future graduates as very good analysts. If you think about it, they're astute to the environment. If we applied STEEP, they know the social trends going on. They know social media. They have seen the social protests. Technology, I would argue they've been born with a cell phone in hand, right? They've always had the internet. Economic, I'm hearing over and over again, what future career should I pick because of our economic crunch? Ecological, global warming is always in the forefront. And political, legal, I don't even have to discuss that. Pretty familiar with the unrest going on. They're adaptable to change. So my nephew Ethan said, hey, I'm going to graduate, in a parade. I'm going to ride a motorcycle. And he adapted to the change. And then finally, resilient to challenges. So I would argue that makes for some potentially pretty strong CI analysts. So to recap, first off, thank you for listening to our presentation. I am going to throw out the question, what classes and skills do you feel are needed for future CI analysts? So this is something we can discuss today, or as I mentioned, we really would love for you to take the survey. But here, and I'll give you the survey link. But for now, probably going to throw it out to everybody. I saw a couple people had questions. So if you have questions on our paper, or if you want to discuss preparing those future analysts, I'm going to go ahead and send it out to the audience.
Fabulous. Thank you, Shelly.
Sure.
And thank you, Fred, for giving us this terrific overview. And I do hope people will participate in this survey, because it really does help to build this body of knowledge, right? So we're all in this. And I do want to point out, for those of you who've been focused on the screen, on the video portion, that there has been some very interesting discussions happening in the chat. And one of the first things that I want to tackle, and Fred, I see you've been there as well in conversation with some of the posters, is the question about biases that has come up regarding AI, and specifically algorithmic biases, right? Basically, these are systems that people are still building, and so when we're talking about narrow or AGI, I know these are questions. Claudia had mentioned that there are some ways that we're using, sort of human sort of driven tools to help correct for these types of biases using scoring. So I think it's just fantastic that we've got this kind of thinking going on. But Fred, would you like to speak to that, and certainly Shelly as well, and Suki, if you like, I'm happy to also open up the mic to you, so that you might be able to share some of the work that you're doing, because you mentioned you were doing some work too to kind of de-bias these systems in the UK. So I'll turn it over to Fred first.
Okay. So I made the point that AI is unbiased. In actuality, if you look at the data, is not biased. The systems used to analyze the data are not biased. The problem is now you're adding human beings. We are biased, right? And not only biased in terms of our attitudes and beliefs, right, which may drive us to look at certain data that we know is going to be more supportive of our position, but we also have innate human biases that are just not related to political orientation, right? The bottom line is the data is pretty much okay. The systems used to extract it and review it are okay. The problem is the human being. That's really going to be a difficult thing to address.
Yeah, and Suki, would you like to speak a bit about some of the work that you're doing in the UK?
So one of the big issues is, while we know that, yes, the data technically is not biased, what we're actually looking at with some of the work that I'm doing with the National Crime Agency and GCHQ and orgs like that is basically the people that are actually designing these systems have designed them so that it does skew. So from the very beginning, before you even have the data out there, it's already biased. So when you're gathering information, you're already gathering it from a skewed point of view, which is why when you look at software that's being built, the way that it collects the data, where it collects the data from, how that is worded. So the taxonomy itself is faulty from the very beginning. And so those are just some of the things that we're looking at. And it really comes down to having a more, it can be diverse input from different types of people. It has to be, because from the past, we've seen that it comes from the same demographic for a very long time, which is why we're getting information from databases that doesn't truly reflect what we need it to reflect. That's why some of it's just not working. So we're just looking at how we change it from the very get-go. Mindsets, education.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would also add, too, that Sharon Sturger in the chat has posted the data used to train AI systems are problematic as well. And so I think famously, we can look to medical data where most studies have traditionally historically been run on the white male population, right, European, and so most of that data tends to be skewed to that. We didn't find out that women had different heart attack symptoms, right, until a couple of decades ago, and so now we're more aware of these things. But for quite some time, that was a mystery because the data was skewed. So there's a lot for us, I think, to think about as Intel practitioners in helping our Intel users and Intel teams understand the soft spots, right? The vulnerabilities of these systems. So I see that as an opportunity for us. So I just want to turn that over to our panelists and ask what they think of that, right? To be able to take what might seem like a disadvantage, right, and turn that into an advantage for those of us who are practicing and educating. Yeah. Any thoughts, Shelly and Fred?
I'm going to hand it to Fred on this one.
Okay. Actually, while you were speaking, Cynthia, I was also looking at a question from Amrithandra, which I think also ties into this, right? On an example of AI being used to help us in CI. And I mentioned during my presentation about a product that the company I used to work for generated, which was a CI software package, right? And what that system did was it was very good at going out into the world and pulling in open source information, right? Publicly accessible information, and doing searches. So basically doing things that we already do, which is going out and searching, right? But automating specific tasks. And this gets to another point that I was making about you want to be selective in what technology you acquire. So if you want to go out and search the world, let's say you're a drug company, right? You're a pharmaceutical company. And you've got a team of CI practitioners, as most of those companies do. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to look worldwide at, who's generating patents. What are those patents for? Who's hiring, right? What are they hiring for? And this is very time consuming and tedious. If you could automate that, right, and have that information pushed to you rather than you having to go out and go to these different sources and pull it, that's a huge advantage. So that's a selective application of AI to enhance something that we already do, but do it faster and more voluminously.
I know, just kind of spinning off what Fred said, I know one of the challenges that our students have, and of course this comes with experience too, is just the overabundance of information, right? So so students tend to get, and I'm sure this happens with analysts, get just inundated with all this information, and what do we use, what don't we use? And really, if you think about it, that is a true selling point of CI. We should really be in the front end of picking and trying to be non-biased in our collections of information. So I would say that is a struggle I know my students are having, and it's a skill that I think we need to continue to hone in on, and could be of great value for CI.
Right,
discipline.
and it also speaks to having a diversity of perspectives well represented
Right.
too, along all aspects in the organization and on CI teams. And so, speaking of organizations, Fred, you mentioned Emrit's question about the organizations using CI. And so the question, I just want to put a finer point on the question, do you feel that this is still early in its adoption in organizations? Do you see differences among various types of organizations in different sectors in terms of AI adoption for intelligence purposes?
Oh, yeah, yes. I think in some ways we're still in the wild, wild west phase, right? So you've got different practitioners that are out there. And oh, by the way, each industry is going to have its own needs, right? So you may be a pharma company interested in patents and you're interested in who's hiring whom. Maybe in a different industry, your needs are different, right? So the nature of your needs are going to drive what you want to enhance or a capability you want to develop that you hadn't had before, right? So that's one driver, is what industry are you from? Uh, Second of all is the nature of the information that you want, right? Is it something that's accessible in a database? Is it something that, it's SEC-driven requirements that a company releases that information so it's accessible, it's relatively reliable, right? Or is it something you've got to basically go to human beings to acquire? So the type of the information, now it's the nature of the information, okay? So these are things that are going to play heavily, or should play heavily, in your decision making as to what systems you want to acquire to be able to do what things.
Terrific. And so, and actually, there's a question here posted by Jean-Francois Pelly. It says, what future do you see for a competitive intelligence analyst who does not know AI? Should a CI analyst learn AI, or should we go our separate ways and complement each other?
Is there really, and we go back to that earlier question, is there really a distinguished curriculum for AI? It's too early. But I'd love to hear what other folks here think about this. CI can go in lots of different arenas, correct? So I think that a future CI analyst that may not know AI, but has a basic knowledge of what data is out there, how to use it, how to visualize it. I think it's still a skill set you're going to need. I don't think it's going to go away. I think you're going to have some knowledge there. But can we teach AI right now? I don't think there's necessarily a full-blown curriculum yet. We can give them kind of a taste of it. I don't think you can go separate ways, though. I think it's going to always be a part of that discipline. And I don't know if Fred agrees or disagrees, but I don't foresee it going away. And I think it will make you kind of vulnerable as an analyst if you don't have just kind of a basic knowledge of it's out there and how to interpret some of it, or at least be part of the team that uses it.
Right. One of the slides I talked about had the 5 major differences between BI and CI. And the reason why AI is so beneficial to business intelligence is because of the nature of business intelligence and the sources of information, processes. It just lends itself to applying software, right, to large volumes of reliable data and to be able to gain better insights. Absolutely, it's a perfect fit for business intelligence. It's not the same fit for competitive intelligence, right? So my point is, I think you should know enough about AI generally in terms of what it is, right? Because you want to get away. A lot of people have been subjected to the hype and don't have a full understanding of what AI, especially narrowly defined AI, is, right? So it may do really, really great things in one area, defeating folks on Jeopardy and doing other things like that. And everybody sits back, ooh, wow. But then when you drop $60,000 if you're at the Anderson Medical Center, and it turns out to be a failure, where they literally walked away from the project, and it was human problems, right? It was the planning and preparation and the assumptions going into it. That's what undermined the validity of the project, okay, in terms of what they got out of it. So 2 things. 1, understand what AI really means, okay? Machine learning, AI, whatever you term it, is basically taking a lot of information and applying software and analyst skills to extract insights that were not previously available. I mean, that in a nutshell is what it is. So understand that. And second of all, understand what you and your client's information needs are and how AI might be able to be applied. And in a lot of cases, it can't, all right? Now, that's the truth in 2020, maybe different in 2030 if we get into more of an AI system that it's more general. It does do more approximation of human cognition. But we're a long way from that.
I really appreciate that, Fred, because I think that in having spoken with some colleagues who are in the technical side of intelligence, they speak about the unevenness of this transition period, and it's going to be quite a long transition period because while we have some terrific narrow AI tools, this promise of AGI, is still quite far, and there's even some talk of this fourth AI winter, where we are hitting a wall because of storage issues, right? Because because the data processing is extremely expensive. The storage is very expensive too, ultimately for that. So for the sheer amount of data that we need, and so we're hitting a wall with that. We're hitting a wall with other technological aspects, and so while there's a lot of sort of the popular press version of AI, there's the reality that many of us are dealing with. And I see that as we go, there are a couple of things. One is that Intel professionals are going to have to conduct situational analysis, right, constantly regarding AI and understanding where we're at and what we need to do to respond given the various contexts. And the other is that we need to educate our users, right, in that, because they're buying into a lot of the sales pitches. August had mentioned that they were looking at some tool in the chat. For those of you who are tracking, they were looking at some tools, and there was the promise of versus the reality that they're facing with, and so there's this constant tension with that, and so it's very important for us to stay on top of this space. So thank you for this. And I want to point to a question that Mark Chussell has shared. And he says, Shelly and Fred, can you comment on whether CI should be predictive or descriptive? If CI does not predict, someone else steps into the vacuum.
Predictive and or descriptive. Well, I foresee descriptive, unless I'm misinterpreting, but descriptive being this is the data, this is the what, this is dashboards and showing information. I think I see us CI analysts as moving more to the prescriptive, to the predictions, to the analysis side. That is our strength. I kind of compare AI to, and I think of my students and having to take all these programming classes at one point. We were trying to hone in that way. You don't need to learn all the programming. You don't need to learn all the in-depth AI pieces, but you need to be able to understand it and what its value is, and then apply it and utilize it that way. So I would say more towards the prescriptive versus the descriptive. Agree, disagree, Fred?
Yeah, I think basically you want to be descriptive and then use what you've described to justify your prediction, right? Because you don't want to.
Yeah, you're still going to need it.
You know what I mean, so I mean, you could stare into your teacup and say, well, based on where the tea leaves are, right? But I mean, what you're doing here is you're looking at the data, you're describing it, and then based on the description, saying, here's what I think is going to happen and why.
Right. Could you argue, now I have a question for Fred. Could you argue descriptive is more in the BI route?
Well, it is. I mean, it's definitely
BI discipline.
Yeah, one of the four things that BI supposedly does, right? Or not supposedly, but actually does, is descriptive. Because you're looking at company data in real time. You're saying, here's what we're doing right now. Okay. So BI can also be predictive, because predictive in the sense that here's what we're doing right now, but oh, by the way, we know we have a shortfall in raw materials coming in. So here's a predictive thing. We're going to have a problem, right? CI is a little bit different because we're relying a lot more on emotional intelligence. We're relying a lot more on human intelligence. So we may have a human intelligence source that says, yeah, all the indicators are showing X, which in reality is happening as Y, right? So quick war story, which actually happens to be a real war story. 1950, right? October 1950, Korean War. So General MacArthur wanted to know if China is going to intervene in the Korean War. And we had aerial reconnaissance, right? So technology, right? Aerial reconnaissance, we could cover everything that was on the ground. The problem was we were so busy using aerial reconnaissance that we didn't take into account that the Chinese were able to move 250,000 soldiers at night, okay, over bridges that they sunk during the daytime and then raised at night. They moved 250,000 soldiers into North Korea. My point is, we were using something that was very good and very capable, but it was narrowly defined, right? Aerial reconnaissance did certain things really well and other things not at all. So one of the challenges for AI in the CI space is a lot of what we do doesn't really lend itself to being automated, okay? So you want to amplify, as in your value proposition, those things that you do really well that don't lend themselves to automation, and the value of human cognition and the predictive analysis, right, based on substantive data. But I think if you can do that, then that's really how you gain and retain your clients.
That's a really important point, Fred, and I just want to link this to what we had seen in the 90s and early aughts, where there were a lot of vendors, selling these KM systems, right, under KM 2.0, and many of them were really overselling to the point where a lot of the purchasers of these systems became disillusioned with KM. And so I would hate to see something like this, repeat itself, within the Intel space and then also on the research side of things too. And so it's really important that we stay on top of these developments, understand, what the pros and cons are, right? What the strengths and weaknesses are, so that we can be better advocates and advisors, to the adoption of these tools within our organization. And so do you and Shelly have any thoughts about how the Intel practitioner can best do this, given that many of us are already strapped for time, right? We're already tapped. The teams are really under a lot of stress given the type of Intel we have to run under these very, very VUCA times.
Hire future analysts that we will have well prepared. I don't know if that's the right answer, but one answer.
Yeah. And maybe I'll put a plug too in for the fellows, because I think we try to serve as eyes and ears and creating these communities where we can stay on top of these things. So maybe I'll just advocate that we stay plugged in with each other in various ways. And with that, actually, I do want to bring in one question that Craig Fleischer had asked in the chat box, and he's been patiently waiting, but we had the burning question of biases in it, and it just kind of snowballed there. But Craig said at the very start of this, he said, I like Fred's and of course Shelly's emphasis on CI practitioners becoming master storytellers, here, and how important visualization is in wielding that capability. I'm interested in hearing more about A, how and in what ways has he found AI to be a contributor to storytelling and developing powerful narratives in particular, and B, the best examples and ways he's found to educate students in better learning and acquiring this skill. And if I may piggyback off that, to say how we can do that with users as well, based on the importance of our advocacy role, based on all of these rapid changes.
Okay, I got another quick war story. It's quick and it is a war story.
And then we'll wind down, yes.
Go back around 20 years, I had to go and brief a general officer who ran a facility. And he 3-star general, he was not a happy guy. He was basically relieved from Iraq for political reasons, and he was miserable. So I'm going to brief him. I have half an hour on his calendar. His aide comes out to the door. I'm in uniform, and I got my PowerPoint presentation on my arm because I'm going to sit there and flip through the slides for half an hour. And the aide looks at me and he kind of makes this funny face and he says, I'm going to tell you 2 things about the general. Number 1, he hates PowerPoint. And number 2, he hates Intel officers. I'm like, great. I'm an Intel officer with a PowerPoint. This is going to be a long 30 minutes, So I walk in the door and then he looks up at me and he kind of makes a face because he sees I'm an Intel officer and he figures I got a PowerPoint. He says, oh yeah, you're the Intel guy who's going to brief me for 30 minutes, right? I said, no, sir. I said, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story, and then I want to ask you a question. He said, really? He sits back. Now he's interested. And I said, remember after 9/11, we needed to get air bases in certain countries around Afghanistan. We had to, negotiate with those governments and all of that to get those air bases. He said, yeah. I said, folks that went through here were people we were able to call on the phone and say, hey, can you help us out on governments in a jam? And they helped us out. I said, would you like to retain that capability? He said, absolutely. I said, well, sign here. So 5 minutes later, I walked out the door and his aide was still standing there. He goes, oh, General threw you out? And I held up the thing with the signature and I said, nope, I just told him a story. So sometimes, you got to be adaptable, because the other thing too is not every client is visual, right? So you may walk in, you may have a client who's going to close their eyes and listen because they're auditory, right? They're not going to look at what you're throwing up in your very nicely created charts, right? So you've really got to, and this is what we're good at in CIs. We're really good presenters, okay? We're really good at figuring out what matters and how do we deliver information in terms of what matters.
That's right. And also knowing our users, right? So
Yes.
terrific, terrific. And so now I want to thank our panelists. And as we wind down, I want to remind you to take that survey. And we'll post that survey also in our social media, Twitter and LinkedIn, and so I'll have the address for you in a bit. But I do want to remind you, the CI Fellows Mentorship Program is up and running. You can find it on our website, Following That Path, or you can email mentoring@cifellows.com. There's also that bit.ly link too if you don't want to follow that path. I also wanted to point out that we're looking ahead at October 26th with our next webinar with Mark Chussell, and the topic is "If You Are Sure, You Are Wrong," looking at where decisions go wrong, where and how decisions go wrong. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And looking ahead into September 15th to 16th, we have our CI 2020 Virtual Summit Series. More details are to come, and you can find it in the path there for our website, cifellows.com, to the events menu at the top of the page. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us and for sticking with us. Especially I think we're about a minute over, and another wonderful discussion. And again, just not enough time. So I do encourage you, to stay in touch and to join us, in our social media, LinkedIn group and Twitter. But thanks so much to Dr. Fred Hoffman and Dr. Shelly Freyn, for kicking off this wonderful discussion and sharing with us your expertise and your ongoing research. So again, another plug for that survey. So stay connected with us. We have our newsletter that goes out once a month that basically tells you what's going on, and with a link to our next webinars. And we have our recordings available on our website, also in our YouTube channel. But stay in touch via Twitter and via our community group as well, and you'll stay on top of everything that's going on, including that survey link. So thank you all very much. And any final words, Shelly and Fred?
Oh, just thank you for the opportunity to kind of share our paper and our work.
Terrific.
Indeed.
Thanks for your great work. And I look forward to the ongoing research. All right, everyone, we're going to stop the recording here. And at this point, we can just chat amongst ourselves.